Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. So, although hundreds of protesters are turning out in Scotland to make their feelings known to the visiting US president, the most newsworthy protest against the Orange one from the last week has come from a cartoon about children which should probably never be watched by actual children. The creators of South Park, which is a show which is really much more like a very in-your-face spitting image in many ways, have been used to pricking those in power for years, decades even. But their latest aim at Donald Trump was intended to draw a response. I'm going to explain how their strategy worked. It's very interesting from a strategic point of view, and how Trump fell into the trap. But first, for daily news and politics, please click the subscribe button to stay notified. So for those who don't know much about it, South Park has had basically a simple rule. Everyone is a target. Presidents, celebrities, entire religions, nothing is ever off limits and nothing is too extreme. It has gone too far a few times, I would say. It's not a program for people who are sensitive, but one of the most successful artisans of parody in America over the last 20 odd years. And when it came to no target off limits, Donald Trump, who's a figure almost designed to be a South Park character, was no exception. But he was weirdly immune. He brushed off every caricature and insult. Then something changed. South Park dropped a new episode, and this time they got a reaction. Not just from fans online, obviously, but a comment from a White House spokesperson. Now, you might imagine that Trump has been dismissive of the show for years, but you'd be wrong. He's always avoided even mentioning it in the past, which is unusual because his rallies are filled with wall-to-wall criticism of every tiny little thing he doesn't like. Even that day he lost his hairbrush got it in the neck. For the first time, the show's creators have managed to provoke a direct comment about their cartoon from the administration. This wasn't just another joke either. It was a clearly targeted psychological ploy. It was calculated to finally crack the code on how to get under Donald Trump's skin. South Park's history with Donald Trump didn't really start with him. It started with Mr. Garrison. So during Trump's first term, the show used Mr. Garrison as a surrogate to explore Trump's rise to power. The jokes portrayed him as an impulsive and incompetent leader. They even depicted him as the president of Canada, which was a classic South Park move to mock the subject and also comment on America's relationship with its neighbours. It does that quite a lot. Now, throughout his presidency, the first term, the show kept up its attacks, but nothing seemed to land. Trump, a man who constantly reacts to his portrayal in the media, I mean, he'll complain about Saturday Night Live, stayed completely silent on South Park. No late night posts, no mentions at rallies, no early morning rants on Truth Social or anything. It was as if the show didn't exist in his world. This immunity was so complete that the show's creators at one point, Trey Parker and Matt Stone, they had actually said, look, you know what, we're done with Trump jokes, because they thought that his administration was just too ridiculous to satirise effectively. They felt they just couldn't compete with reality. I mean, how many times have we said this in both the US and the UK of politics in this post-truth world? You cannot parody something when reality is too unbelievable. Or maybe Trump just understood that there was no point in attacking South Park because that would just encourage them. But for whatever reason, it seemed that Trump was basically bulletproof to their brand of comedy. The jokes would hit home with their audience. Critics would analyse the episodes and explain how it relates to real life. But Trump just ignored it all, which set a bit of a precedent. You could mock his policies. You could caricature his speech. You wouldn't get a response. This history of immunity is exactly what makes this latest episode so remarkable. They didn't just come back to the topic of Trump. They came back with a new strategy, one that was designed to not just mock him, but to get through that armour that had protected him. So what made this new wave of jokes different? Well, it wasn't a single line. It was a full-on assault. It was built on three key factors that turned satire into a strategic psychological operation. First, most important, arguably, the attack was personal. So the old jokes using Mr. Garrison, fictional character who was just acting as a political parody, that was gone. The new episode dropped that deniability about who they were targeting. They were targeting Donald J. Trump, the man, aiming squarely at his public image and his ego. The show sort of dug into some of the most toxic and persistent narratives surrounding him. including explicit jokes referencing alleged connections to Jeffrey Epstein, which is the biggest weakness in Trump's power right now. It wasn't a commentary on policy, it was a direct assault on his character. The episode also resurrected a bit of a classic South Park trope to signal ultimate corruption, a depiction of Trump in bed with Satan. Now, in South Park universe, Satan comes in it quite a lot. And he's usually used to explore themes of what they will consider moral decay. Placing Trump in that context, in literally the place of Saddam Hussein from the cinema movie many years ago, was a deliberate choice to frame him not just as a bad leader, but a figure of profound moral bankruptcy, really. By making the jokes intensely personal, what South Park did was they moved the fight from the political arena to the realm of public image, where Trump has always been far more sensitive. Second factor really was using the Streisand effect. Now, the creators knew that they really had to go for it, and the more they go for it, the higher the chance of a response. And that's what they wanted. And they knew that any response, no matter how dismissive, would be a massive signal boost. It would amplify their message to millions, really. You know, they baited the hook and the Trump administration took it. White House spokesperson Taylor Rogers released a statement claiming that South Park was hanging on by a thread by uninspired ideas. Now, that statement was, ironically, the best thing that the creators could have asked for. You know, for a show that is being accused of being irrelevant. Of course it is. It's been going on for over 20 years, right? Provoking a comment from a White House spokesperson, that is the ultimate proof of relevance, right? It validated their entire effort. Instead of ignoring the uninspired cartoon, the administration has inadvertently entered the arena there. They've confirmed that the jokes have landed with enough force to warrant a formal statement. That is the core of the strategy. Create content where silence is no longer considered an option. And it was made all the more powerful because Trump and his team had ignored them completely for years. The comments showed that something was different this time. Can't get much more relevant than that. And then the third and final factor is the legal shield, which makes it all possible. This is where it's important to understand the situation in America. South Park's creators aren't just, they might look like they're being a bit reckless and, oh, what Paramount going to think of this? Oh my God. They were operating from a position of immense legal strength. So in the USA, satire and parody of public figures are incredibly well protected under the First Amendment, freedom of speech. There was a 1988 Supreme Court case I saw, Hustler Magazine versus Falwell. Now, that established that public figures cannot sue for emotional distress over offensive parodies. So to be considered defamatory, to be able to sue them, the parody has to be believable as fact. And no one's really going to mistake South Park for a documentary. Like, their latest effort features Donald Trump with a talking micro penis. I mean, even MAGA supporters who believe all sorts of mad shit, even MAGA supporters are not going to believe that Trump actually has a penis. I mean, this legal precedent creates a nearly impenetrable shield. It allows Parker and Stone to be far more aggressive and personal than traditional news outlets or even other comedy shows. The badly drawn cartoon style of the show is such obvious parody that they have immense license, more so than some other comedy shows. They know that while a lawsuit could be threatened, it would fail in court and lead to even more public ridicule. In fact, it's believed part of the reason they went so hard on Trump is out of frustration that their bosses, effectively Paramount Studios, folded in a lawsuit with Trump, which they would almost certainly have won. There's been a bit of that going on. People and organisations surrendering to Trump in lawsuits which predate his second presidency, where Trump was going to lose, seen as a sign of fealty, right? The South Park creators, they're not really into fealty to political demagogues. And this legal protection empowers them to push boundaries and engineer jokes designed to be as damaging as possible without fearing major legal hazard. It's the foundation this entire strategy was built on. And when you combine that intensely personal attack, you know, getting rid of the surrogate, now Donald J. Trump, the deliberate baiting of a response, the ironclad legal protection, you get a perfect storm. You know, the break here, it wasn't like some courtroom showdown. This doesn't have to go to court. The break was the shattering of that immunity, because for years, the strategy was to stay above the fray, to act as if the cartoon jesters were irrelevant. That's what Trump did, just ignored them, right? Strategy's broken because his spokespersons mentioned them. The fallout came from the spokesperson's statement itself. For a figure who cultivates an image of strength and dominance, Having his administration complain about a cartoon reads as a clear sign of agitation. He was no longer successfully ignoring the noise. His own team was complaining about it. This right here is the victory South Park wanted. They didn't need to win a lawsuit. They just needed to get a reaction. They proved their joke still had the power to get under his skin. So what's the long-term fallout? Well, it's not about changing votes overnight. It's about the slow erosion of that cultural image, especially with younger audiences. The online discourse suggests that South Park's satire, particularly its focus on the Epstein narrative, that's resonating. That is resonating, particularly with a generation that lives through internet culture. You know, every time a show with the cultural weight of South Park reinforces a narrative, it cements it in the public consciousness. It makes it harder to escape. You know, the episode becomes a cultural touchstone. It's like a meme, a shared reference point for these voters. You know, there have been a few episodes or moments in South Park which have become immortal in pop culture over the years. And the hope is that this would be another, and one which will have a direct impact on the fight back against Trump. Trump's reacted, he's irked, but he's also impotent. He's now revealed to the world he doesn't like it. So what's he going to do? Is he going to stop it? He can't stop it. He can threaten to sue, of course, as he's doing with pretty much everyone right now. Oh, he had a right rant in Britain last night during his visit, where he conducted himself with a characteristically complete lack of any grace. And Stone and Parker would love it if Trump tried to sue them. It's like they want him to, in order to make up for Paramount's capitulation. They want him to sue, to lose, and to expose to the world that he isn't all powerful after all. Trump should have just ignored it. If asked directly, he could have just said, I don't know, I don't watch it. Easy, innit? Easy. But he couldn't, did he? He couldn't. He had to bite back. And now he's made what would have otherwise been just another satire on a very old television show, something which more people will take notice of now. It's the latest act of resistance against Trump, and the more he pushes, the more resistance he's finding. Combined with his weakness over the Epstein files, these acts of resistance could yet bring him crashing down to earth. The Orange Icarus. But let me know what you think in the comments below. For more content, you could subscribe to the channel or even join for access to streams and behind the scenes updates. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.